What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Ryan Kai Show. Today on topic is some of the lesser trades of the NBA free agency, including Yogi Ferrell backing out of his deal with the Mavericks, Jared Dudley getting traded from the Suns to the Nets for Darrell Arthur, and we're also talking about Shelvin Mack going to the Grizzlies to help fortify their backcourt. So, to start, Kyle, let's talk about the trade between the Suns, Jared Dudley, and Darrell Arthur of the Nets. I mean, I'm not talking about, it's not high profile. I get that. But I'm more interested in this story because I am envious of the Brooklyn Nets. I know, a word that no one ever thought anyone would ever say ever. No one would ever say that, right? But they are doing free agency right as far as rebuilding teams go. They traded for Kenneth Faried and got a 2019 first round pick. They got rid of Jeremy Lin and in return got a pick out of it. They also got a second round pick and another deal. I don't remember what exactly it was. And this Suns deal, they get Jared Dudley, and because he's on a bigger contract than Darrell Arthur, who's only making $7 million, Jared Dudley's making 9.5. Darrell Arthur's making about 7. And they get a pick out of it. So they move up $2 million and acquire a second round pick out of it. So they're really doing a good job in acquiring picks after being totally demolished and kind of removed of picks after the Bobby Marks fiasco with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. Now, I don't know. As a Kings fan, I just feel a little envious because they're doing it right and we're doing it horrible. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I like the moves that Brooklyn's made. I don't know if they're having a killer free agency. But...
No, I mean they're not freaking bringing in marquee stars, but they're doing a good job keeping space open and acquiring a ton of picks.
Yeah, they also made the move earlier in the free agency period with Dwight Howard in order to clear up some room in their cap and everything.
And they bought him out.
Yeah, so that was a pretty smart move.
And then they also signed Shabazz Napier to a minimum contract for, I think it was 2-year deal, minimum contract. And after he was coming off a revitalization in Portland, he had done a really good job in Portland. And all of a sudden, they just didn't retain him, and they decided to move on to Seth Curry in Portland.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if Brooklyn's in my top 5 free agency teams this year, but they're definitely, doing good compared to what they've done in the past. I think that's the problem, is that for them, anything looks like improvement because they've had so many bad years and bad mismanagements.
I think they're doing a good job, though. Acquiring picks, taking on bad contracts to acquire first round, second round picks. That's what you're supposed to do if you're in a deep rebuild. They are not going to be a good team anytime soon, but the way you get out of that slump is by acquiring picks and getting younger.
Yeah.
And it's better than teams who aren't trading for picks and instead are throwing giant wads of money at players who aren't very good. Oh. Kings. Anyways, it makes sense. That's all I'm trying to say. And it's good acquisitions. I think they're on the right track to getting their picks back, into getting younger. And I mean, they got a lot of players that I think are underrated, not talked about a lot. I mean, D'Angelo Russell, I think, is a good player for them.
I like D'Angelo Russell. I thought D'Angelo Russell was a really good player, even when people were kind of hating on him, when he left the Lakers, to go over to Brooklyn. I thought that was a steal for Brooklyn.
When he got traded?
Yeah, I still think that he's a pretty good player.
In retrospect, that trade did not work out in Brooklyn's favor. Because it's they got D'Angelo Russell, but the Lakers got Brook Lopez and the pick that turned into Kyle Kuzma.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like the whole fact that they got rid of Brook Lopez. I actually like Brook Lopez, too. He's another one of those players that a lot of people kind of don't really care for that I prefer.
He signed a minimum deal this year to join the Bucks.
Yeah.
Lopez. And he was one of the best players on the market. He could have gotten a $10 million deal somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's a solid center still. I think his issues are
defense.
His defense is fairly weak for that position. Horrible. I mean, especially for a guy that's not a great stretch player. He can stretch, but he's not.
He's one of the best stretch bigs in the league.
No.
Yes,
no,
he is.
no,
Yes, he
no.
is. He's above 40% as a big. He's a great. He's been getting better every year, and he is one of the leading stretch shooters in the league every year. Now he's top 5 every year.
Well, shooter, yeah, but he's more I mean, okay, I get your point.
If you were gonna make a point about like off dribble shooters,
No,
if you
no,
can
no,
find
no,
a
no,
center,
he's
who
not
can
an
do
off.
dribbles,
He's not an off
then
dribble shooter.
Let me know.
Well, there is one I can think of. And that's Anthony Davis, but that's just because it's
That
Anthony
is,
Davis.
he's an anomaly. Okay.
Right. No, to your point, but I don't know. Brooke, I don't like him stretching as much because he's a little slower, bigger. I think he's better down in the post, but my point was that for a guy whose primary game is down in the post still, his defense is weaker than what you would hope for out of him.
But let's get back to Brooklyn and their multiple acquisitions of trades this offseason. What do you think the timetable is for Brooklyn to get back into contention or to start getting better? Because a lot of people think because they're trying to clear that cap space, well, they're going to have a lot of cap space next year. So a lot of people have been wondering if because they're in a close proximity to New York with all these free agents coming, that maybe they could throw huge amounts of money in. I mean, it's not the New York Knicks, but you are in Brooklyn. And, you know, these guys it's a small commute to New York. I mean, I don't know. Is that a possibility for big free agents to land? Or do you think that the Knicks have a higher chance? Because they're going to have cap space next year, too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just don't think of Brooklyn as having the ability to bring in these big free agents. I know that they're basically in New York, so they should have an access to that larger market, but I don't think that's necessarily how it translates in reality.
Well, maybe if they had a better team that they could then lure guys there.
I mean, they were able to get, Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett there through trades, but I mean, those players were fairly happy when they were there up until they started not winning the way that they had been projected to win.
Darren Williams.
Right. So, I mean, could you attract free agents if you had, talent of that level there already? Maybe. But I don't see that in their future anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think there's some sort of prestige. There's a kind of prestige that comes with the New York Knicks. That if you both had cap space and a team had picked between Brooklyn and New York, the Knicks, you pick the Knicks. It's the franchise of the East Coast. Like them, the Celtics are like the two biggest franchises of the East Coast, in my opinion. In the Eastern Conference, I think those are the biggest.
Philadelphia 76ers would be up there, too. Yeah, they have a good story.
There's a few staple franchises in the NBA, and those two are definitely the bigger ones. And I think the 76ers and the Bulls are also big franchises on the East, but those are the staples. As I think of when I think of like the trademark corner franchises.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of view Brooklyn, oddly enough, in the same kind of way that I see Sacramento. A lot of players want to flood to California. A lot of these free agents want to flood to California, and no one has more, cap room usually and money to throw at people than the Kings. And Brooklyn's kind of in the same situation. People want to go to New York, but if they get their choice, and even with all the money, I think they're going to have a hard time getting the free agents the same way the Kings have a difficult time, even with all the money, getting someone to come.
So let's talk about the Kings, because one of the stories that came out today was that Yogi Ferrell would be backing out from his deal with the Dallas Mavericks.
Right.
So this was interesting because Yogi Ferrell, the Mavs rescinded his $2.9 million qualifying offer, which they then offered him a deal which was 2 years, 5.3, which is a lower rate than his qualifying offer. 2 years, 5.3 million. I felt like was a ridiculous underpayment of what he brings you to a team. I think he could be a solid role player and or a starter on some of the worst teams in the league. Like, I think he's a good speedster, good shooter. He brings a lot to an offense. I view his value more at like a $6 or $7 million range for certain teams. I mean,
Yeah.
I think he got vastly overpaid, and I think he realized that.
Underpaid. Yeah.
Sorry, underpaid. And I think he realized that, and that's why his agent and him backed out of this deal. And per reports, there are some interest from the Sacramento Kings who could, I guess, use the speedster and the kind of offense that he would provide coming off the bench at point guard position. I think Frank Nason's a good player, but I think Yogi Ferrell's a far better player as of right now. And he's still young. He's 25. So what are your thoughts on this decision by Yogi Ferrell to back out?
I mean, can I first say that another person backing out of a free agency deal that was pretty much a done deal with Dallas?
This is weird. And then talking about the Kings, like Felicio did the same thing. He was in a done deal with the 76ers, said he was going to go to Europe, and all of a sudden there's reports that he was negotiating a deal with the Kings. It's like, I think people are realizing the Kings got the cash. If you want to make a killing, go to that shit franchise and they'll offer you a huge sum of money for your talents.
Well, that. But I was referencing more that Dallas's organization has now dealt with another person backing out of a contract after, their whole issue with DeAndre Jordan.
It's not quite as big of a deal.
No, obviously not.
DeAndre
it's not the same level.
All-star.
Not the same level of a player, but it is interesting that Dallas seems to have this issue that it could be an issue with them not communicating well enough with the players' agents.
I personally believe what the issue is that they expect players to take a very low, like, they pay their big players well, okay? Mm-hmm. But they expect their guys who are kind of just role players to take cuts to make the team successful. That's not the thing you do on a team that's that bad.
Yeah.
And like they're expecting, like, Dirk Nowitzki opted out so that he could have more money. So he could sign a lower deal so that they could have more money in free agency to acquire guys this year. He's done that last year, the year before that. Yogi Ferrell got the qualifying offer of 2.9 rescinded to get a $5.3 million deal. It's like, why is he making less money? And they still have cap space to offer him.
I think it's interesting because I think Dallas kind of looks at it and they're like, well, if we look at the history of Yogi Ferrell, he's an undrafted player who pretty much had to try out for the team. Like, basically. He kind of, went through the 10-day contract process.
Yeah, and he did phenomenal.
And he did. And he's a great player, and I think he's gotten some notoriety around the league and gotten some awareness, and I think that's why he's decided to back out of that deal and go elsewhere, is because he feels like he does have higher value. But I think Dallas was looking at it from a strictly, like, this is a player we can afford to lowball because they don't have the pedigree or the history to maybe make the argument with some other teams for the money. And so I think they thought they could lowball him and get him at that lowest rate, which would give them more mobility and moving with other pieces. But I think Yogi Ferrell did the right thing. I think that obviously the Kings are definitely in the conversation because Yogi Ferrell's not a high enough level free agent to allow his, let's say, displeasure with going to the Kings outweigh the amount of cash that they can throw at him.
But also, I think Saval point is like, it's not like you're leaving. It's not like with the whole Marcus Smart rumor with the Kings. Remember how that came out a few weeks ago? Right. Marcus Smart may be considering a contract with the Kings. Didn't end up happening. He ended up resigning. But what I think was interesting is that everyone knew Marcus Smart wasn't going to leave the Celtics.
Right.
He was just trying to jimmy up his price. It's not like it is with Yogi Ferrell. Like, Dallas isn't a freaking world-class organization, top-tier Western Conference team. They may not even make the Western Conference Finals. They're one of the bottom-of-the-barrel teams. The playoffs, not the finals, sorry. Yeah. They're a bottom-of-the-barrel team in the Western Conference, so...
They're a good organization, though. I think Dallas is a well-run organization, despite some of these issues.
And can I make a little footnote here that as far as the Sacramento's appeal to players go, I've always hated this rhetoric that has come that Sacramento is the worst city in the NBA to go to. Analysts on ESPN say it like every day religiously. It's said all over the league. Yeah. Fans say it. It's ridiculous, okay? As someone who has lived in the area, it is a nice, beautiful area of California. One of the prettiest areas of California. It is a nice city, a clean city with really high-class people, and it's not as small as people think. The area is a pretty big area. It's not no Los Angeles or New York or Brooklyn or those cities, but it's a pretty nice city, and it's got a lot of things to do. Anything you want to do, you can do in the area.
Yeah.
Now that being said,
And I think
every player who's ever gone there initially said the same thing. Chris Webber, our best player of the franchises, of Sacramento franchise history, said there was a story out when he was there in Sacramento that he cried in his hotel room because he was so afraid because it looked like there was nothing here. He ended up re-signing because he loved the area so much. So obviously there's something going on here that's good.
No, I think that that's true. I think when players get to Sacramento, they tend to enjoy their time here. I think it's a perception issue.
And the culture is getting better now with Marvin Bagley liking the Kings, Fox kind of going out there with guys.
They're new rookies that are going to hopefully be their future stars, are really advocates of the area and of the team. I think the problem is a perception issue. I think it's pushed by these people who don't really understand Sacramento or kind of don't like Sacramento.
Never even been to Sacramento, some of these people who are talking about it.
So it's a perception issue, and when you have a perception issue, it doesn't matter how nice the area is. If players think that Sacramento's not the best place to go, then that's the problem. It's a perception issue. So guys like Marcus Smart are never going to go to Sacramento if they have the choice because they're too high profile and that perception outweighs their willingness to move.
I think that will change because we forget San Francisco isn't the best area in the world to live in. Okay, it's a bigger city. I understand that. But it is expensive. Very, very expensive. One of the most expensive cities to live in the entire country. It is not the cleanest city. It is a very polluted city. There are a lot of problems with San Francisco. Now, that being said, when the Golden State Warriors were really, 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 really bad a few years ago, no one wanted to go there. No free agents. No matter how much money they had, no one wanted to play in Golden State. Now that they're a good team, they're able to attract those players.
Well, of course, that I think weighs out more than locale to players. I think that if you order it, it depends on the player, but it's probably a combination of the level of talent at the team, the success, the money, and then locale is lower on that totem. Probably third.
I think the only time locale really plays in is when the player is from that area, because then they have a incentive to want to go back for personal reasons. And that's why LA and New York have a big appeal because they're bigger cities.
Locale is, unfortunately for Sacramento because of the perception, the locale plays a bigger role than it should in a negative way. And because we've seen it. They have more money a lot of times to offer these guys, and these players will choose less money and go elsewhere because of the perception they have about Sacramento.
Speaking of small market teams, another acquisition that happened today was when the Memphis Grizzlies signed Shelvin Mack. So this is not a big deal, obviously, but what I like about this is that Shelvin Mack is a solid point guard. In his best season, he averaged 12.7 points per game and 5.3 assists. So in 2015-16, okay? So just a few years ago, he was doing good production. He's a solid player, I think, to come off the bench. He is a good acquisition to that team who I feel like, even though they were one of the worst teams in basketball last year, it wasn't because they were one of the worst teams in basketball last year. It was because of the fact that they didn't have Mike Conley, and once Mike Conley went down with the injury, they stopped playing Marc Gasol, and they started playing all the young guys they had, right? So they didn't really commit to the team being as best as it could have been. It was more, hey, let's tank this season and rebound next season with all our good players. Now, a year older Marc Gasol, a year older Mike Conley, who knows, but they were a tough team. They took the Spurs to a good series just last year. So it's not like they're a bad team. And I think adding a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr., who is surprisingly a good shooter. Like, I knew he was a good shooter coming out of Michigan State, but after watching Summer League, he is a really good shooter for being a stretch big. And he's almost 7 feet. He's a great shot blocker. I think he is a good acquisition to play alongside Marc Gasol, to add a good layer of defense that I think they've been lacking, to add a little more of that grit and grind they're missing. And then they make the trade with Sacramento to acquire Garrett Temple, who's a good defensive wing who can play two. He can play some one. He can play 2 and 3. I mean, he's a good player, a good veteran leadership. And then they also add Shelvin McNabb, who's another good veteran. And they're not, you see, they're not really acquiring young guys. They're acquiring veterans because I think they believe themselves to be more of a playoff team than necessarily.
Yeah, I think Memphis thinks that they've got basically 1 or 2 years to make a some sort of run, and they realize that, you know, we might as well acquire what we feel like are the best veterans that can give us the shot at that right now, because we want these guys that are older so that when we're ready for the rebuild in a couple of years, we can just start dishing off these players.
They got some good young guys too. Like Kyle Anderson signed a 3-year deal with the Grizzlies.
No, and it doesn't hurt to have young guys on the team. I just think that, you know, when you're looking at like the McLemore-Garrett Temple trade, it makes sense from their end to go and get Garrett Temple over McLemore, because McLemore doesn't really have the upside, and the youth isn't useful for them when they could get someone who's a better defender, a better, you know, kind of solid role player that can give them a better chance at, you know, solidifying the team now for the next couple of years while they still feel like they have a shot, and then they can, you know, go get someone young in the draft later when they're in rebuild.
And I think to that point about fit for Garrett Temple, I think it's really smart that they targeted exactly what they need to fix. Memphis looked at the roster and they said, okay, our wings are weak. We need to go get some wings. Go get a veteran wing in Garrett Temple and a young wing that came from a great system who was shown to be a very good passer and a very good player in Kyle Anderson for a long-term 3-year deal for a good price, not too expensive, but not really like too ridiculously cheap either, like a decent price. And I think their ability to target and address the issues on the roster at the wing position is a really doesn't say enough about how good their front office has done this year, even though it didn't make big splash. Even though it's not the biggest players, they addressed their issue, they fixed it. That a lot of teams don't get that halfway. So
yeah, absolutely. I think Memphis is a high quality organization, and they consistently make high quality moves, and they show that in these moves that they've made this free agency, they show that they have a strategy that they're trying to follow, and they believe in their vets. And whether or not that, you know, we sitting here think that they can make a run for any type of depth into the playoffs with what they have, that's what they believe, and they're going to stick to their guns and go for it over the next few years, and then look to transition into a different phase. And I think that the way that they've made their moves and organized, I think that they've positioned themselves well to follow that strategy.
Yeah, and I think they owe it to their fans too, because there was a lot of chatter this offseason about how the Grizzlies, a lot of people thought like Memphis should have lost their team and then the Grizzlies should have been relocated somewhere. There's obviously that split, that cell in freaking NBA fans, that splinter cell where they're like, oh, go back to Seattle. Tried doing it with the Kings. They've tried doing it with multiple teams before. But the whole Seattle splinter cell group that said that they should move that team because they felt like, one, there were a few really bad games last year for Memphis. That whole game where they lost by like 60 points. Remember that game? That was horrendous to watch as a fan of sports anywhere. I don't care if you don't even know what basketball is. You watch that and you know that's garbage. Okay, and that and like the 20 games without a win after All-Star break. I mean, that's just like blatant tanking, and I get that's what they were doing, but I think with these anti-tanking rules now, it's going to kind of it's going to try and deter teams from trying to do that anymore and move away from teams trying to tank, which I think is good for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't hate the tanking thing. You know, 76ers had success with it in their rebuild to where they are now. I understand why teams do it. It just makes sense. Like, why win when you could lower your draft position?
There's no point in competing if you don't have a team that can really compete. I understand that, but as a fan of a bad team, it's annoying when the team doesn't care and the team's just throwing an entire year of players away because
Yeah.
it wants to go get a pick, which may end up being nothing. That
Right.
pick could turn into Kwame Brown, and you just spent a year blowing it.
Right. It's frustrating because I think it comes from these organizations having more long-term ambition, and I think that fans don't care about that usually. Most fans don't care about the ambitions of the organization. They care about the entertainment value in the present.
Yeah.
And it is frustrating as a fan to watch teams. I mean, you know this, watching the Kings. It's frustrating watching teams go through a rebuild because it's tough.
Is. But as a fan, I am a very practical fan. The fact that I understand teams are not going to be good. I want the team to do the rebuild the right way. I want the team to develop the right way. And I'll put up with the garbage in order for the team to really get good. Like, I want them to do it the right way. And
Yeah.
I think fans have, but I think doing it too long, rebuilds too long, and blatant tanking especially. Like, look how it worked out for the Kings. I think the basketball gods, who I'm a firm believer of, give teams that show effort at the end of the season and that don't blatantly tank the benefit of the doubt. That's why the Kings have moved up 2 years in a row, even though they've been pushing at the end of the season, trying just to win games, which I think not only builds a good culture, but I think it's good for young teams to know that's what you should be doing, instead of the Dallas Mavericks is coming out and saying, oh, it's better if you guys just lose games. It's like, you're telling a competitor not to be competitive. And I think that is a worse crime than just tanking it.
That's a really interesting point, and I tend to agree with that point because I think the culture is a huge difference. And if we look back at Golden State, and we go back a ways, back into the mid-2000s, when they were not the best team. Like, that's not a crazy statement. They were not the best team. But they were one of the best offenses. They always had a really high-scoring offense. They were still enjoyable to watch, even though they didn't get you many wins and they weren't a very good team. They weren't going to make the playoffs, but they were a fun team to watch, and they always were trying hard.
Yeah.
And I think that culture does get passed down. I think that is translated all the way up to the current Warriors and the current culture there.
I don't think that's just a player thing. I think when you tell the players, I want you fighting for every game.
Yeah.
Don't ever take a game off. Always trying to win. Always give it your best. Always trying to improve. I think that translates from the owner all the way down to the GM, the president of basketball operations, and all the front office, all the way down to the players and the coaching staff. I think it's an organizational thing that I think is very important if you're ever going to build a championship team. And I think not enough teams respect that, and too many teams will blatantly tank, which only builds a culture of losing, and I think makes these guys not want to get better.
teams like Philadelphia kind of got away with it because they really only did it for a very short time.
But you look how it's hurting teams like the Orlando Magic, who have been tanking so many years that it's since Dwight Howard left, they have not been good, and they're just tanking. And now all the guys they're getting are just underperforming.
Right, and
Everyone
who
on their
wants to
selections
stay?
have
Who
underperformed.
wants to stay in that organization? Who wants to play in that organization? So they've lost some of their, what they would call their prospects that they had at some times. Guys like Elfrid Payton, guys like that.
Well, they lost Elfrid Payton. They've lost Mario Hezonja. They've lost Jonathan Isaac had 5 points a game as a rookie.
Yeah.
Come on. I mean, that's...
No, I'm just saying some of those prospects that were the guys that they were hoping would be their rebuild pieces, they get discouraged and they kind of disappear because, it's tough to be in that culture.
Yeah,
especially to grow in that culture. You talk about like the Kings and you got guys like De'Aaron Fox and Bagley that you want to grow. It's really difficult to grow players like that if the culture is bad. That's where the Kings could have success.
And I think
they have
that
a good culture.
comes with the guys you select as also. De'Aaron Fox, I know we talk a lot about the Kings, but De'Aaron Fox is a leader, and people knew that coming out of college. The guy wanted to win. He was a competitor, a leader, and people always talk about with teams, the Kobe assassin-like mentality that Donovan Mitchell and certain players have. I think that's understated because that mentality doesn't come easy. You have to be in a great organization like the Lakers, like the Utah Jazz, who want to win. Because if you don't want to win, you can't have the mentality, and without that mentality, you can't be a great player.
Absolutely.
The best players have to have some sort of mentality that says, I want to win. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe. You can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and stay tuned for more content covering free agency in the next few days. Check us out on The Ryan Kai Show.